Good evening, everyone. My name is Qwizical, and welcome to another of Qwizical's Guides to. And today we will be looking at when to play the cue. Now, this is something that some players will say immediately get rid of that little annoyance, or some players may consider keeping it a bit longer in the hopes that they'll draw the perfect tiles in order to get the best out of it. But ideally, when should we be playing the cue? That's what I'm going to look at here in a recent game I played, where I decided to hold on to the cue, and we'll see if that actually worked out really nicely for me. As you could probably tell, I'm in a different location for this video. I am actually at home, not in student accommodation. I am technically in bed as well, but yeah, it's nice and warm in here, so yeah. So this is the situation where I've drawn the cue on my opening rack, and there is no play with the cue. Now, some people here may be like, get rid of that thing straight away, it's going to ruin my game, all sorts. But what can we do instead of maybe exchanging the cue straight away? Well, we could play something like tweet, or basically any play that really gets rid of tiles, really. So tweet is one option. You could also say play tote or toe, really anything. It's an opening move. Sometimes there's only so much you could do. Turnover is one thing that you might look for on your opening move. The thing is, sometimes changing on your opening move gives the advantage to your opponent. I know personally my opponents tend to play a lot of 5-letter words, so I really don't like leaving the option to score 30 plus points open, so I would rather play something for 12 than changing just to do that. But that's in the opening moves video. So here I actually play tote, and then my opponent here gets their double down. But this is something really interesting now, because now we're able to play the cue. So we've got QI here for 25. And that's one of the options to play a cue. Now, some players may do that straight away because they want to get rid of the cue. And that's perfectly alright, but it's always important to consider what the alternatives are to playing that cue. So on this board, what can we do instead of playing that cue? Well, we've got nice hot spots here at J6, at J10, and maybe we could play something along row L as well, just either side of the forked Gordies here, because it's quite obvious that we can't bonus. So sometimes when you're considering your play, the cue play or non-cue play, you've really got to look for what other options are out there. So the alternative to playing the cue would be essentially getting rid of the M and the W. They are the most awkward letters on the rack. They're quite clunky with the cue. Unfortunately, we've got no Z, so we can't play that. As much as I would love to, it's just not fine. But so a play like Mo, it gets rid of all the letters you really want to get rid of except the Q. Q, I-E, blank. While the Q and the I are there, you may have to forego a potential bonus next turn because you are keeping the Q. You at least know that you are able to play the Q next turn because you've got QI spots. So because you know that you can play it, it's quite possible that you don't actually mind keeping it on your rack another turn, because say there's 3 U's in the bag, and you've still got the blank on your rack to give you that flexibility of an additional U if you need it, and you're scoring say 40 or 50 points with the Q next turn, and you feel like it's a reasonable trade-off between getting rid of the Q and getting some score. Another play that I saw was Meow, that scores about 10 points more than Mo does. And it also has the advantage of taking out this spot. You've still got the Q spot available. But the thing is, I'm scoring 36 points as opposed to 25 to play the Q. And these 11 extra points and taking out additional hotspots, I feel are more beneficial to do than just by playing the Q. Because if I just play the Q with QI for 25, my opponent could have the I and score 25 again underneath. But I'm probably too worried about the triple to then play again underneath that if I have an N next turn to score anything decent, and maybe I have to play across one of these openings, or maybe my opponent's gonna have like a big score with, say, the Z on one of these openings. And also the MOWE blank leave, what am I really going to pick up that's going to benefit me? I mean, WOM can be quite difficult anyway. I know you've got prefixes, things like women. You also have like you may have like wormers or something, just some word like that you could have, but you're reliant on specific letters to pick up, like you can be. But despite the Q being on this rack, the whole flexibility of being able to play it next turn, and 36 points versus 25 means that I really like keeping the Q here. Also because it's really early in the game, so I don't feel like I'm losing too much by keeping hold of the Q, and because there's loads of stuff still in the bag, you never really know what you're going to pick up. So after I play Meow, my opponent then plays Yui, and my rack looks a bit different. You may think, well, Qwizical, you've got two N's and an O and a Q on your rack. What can you really have here at all? Well, it's funny you should say that. Immediately, you may be thinking, yeah, we should play Chin here, or Quinn, for 29 points. That's the obvious play here. Why do we need to make a video about this? Well, interestingly, our opponents just play Yui, and the Q goes in front of Yui, and that doesn't say QE, that's key. And you're probably thinking, oh, but we should play Chin here, shouldn't we? No, because all that Q perseverance has kind of paid off a bit. We actually have, if I could type, Quinone for a whopping 96 points. So, despite the fact that I actually kept the Q for 2 turns, maybe some would argue unnecessarily, so instead of changing and maybe not drawing good enough letters, so maybe a change, I'd be 70 points behind, and then maybe I'd get about 20 points, and then maybe 30, so I'd be on 50. Instead of that, I've managed to get 8 points, 36 points, 44, and then I've managed to get 96 points by actually drawing a bonus with a Q. So of course Q bonuses are really unlikely, and I did get incredibly lucky with my pickup that enabled me to have a Q bonus, but you should never really say the Q is so horrible I should get rid of it immediately, because it is possible to draw well into the Q even if you're not holding a U. Like, of course you're dependent on having that blank as well, but there are a ton of U-less keywords out there that you can use to really help your score, and if you learn all the U-less keywords, which you should be doing, you'll be able to maximize the Q really, really, really well, hopefully. And of course 96 points for Quinone is nothing to be sniffed at. So instead of, say, being on about 50 points after 3 turns, if I exchange the first move, I actually managed to get 140 points total. And it's always good to consider how much you're scoring across turns. So if you're, say, scoring like 100 points across 3 turns, that's really, really good. But if you're only scoring, say, 50 points across 3 turns, that's not so good, and that's not really sustainable to win a game. So let's go on to the summary. So the first point in when to play your cue is, what are the alternatives to playing that cue? Is the cue play your real only option? Is playing the cue for 11 or 22 or 25 or however much, assuming it's not 60 points. If it's 60 points, you're going to play it because it's 60 points. But if it scores about 20 points or less, is it really worth playing it? Is there some other play out there, say like Meow that I saw, that scores 30 points, that is actually really worth considering because it's 30 points and it's 10 more, and you've still got the cue to play next turn because you're holding, say, an eye, and you're allowing yourself a kind of leeway that if you don't pick up a more decent rack or a U to get the cue, then you can at least get rid of it later and not have to sacrifice your turn by changing to do so. Point number 2, how many U's are left in the bag? This is a good initial judge of whether you should keep your cue or get rid of it. So this is something that tends to occur a lot later in games, whereby more of the tiles have been played. So say you've drawn the cue and there's like maybe 10, 20 tiles left in the bag, but there's only 1 U left and maybe not so many eyes. It's in that situation, it's more important to get rid of the cue quicker because you're less likely to play it. U's are kind of a first guide on how easy it is to play the cue. Eyes are a second guide. Eyes are also really important. I remember playing an endgame once where it was actually U's, I's, A's and T's that actually influenced my decision on what to do with the cue. And in that case, I changed the cue because I knew that because there was basically no I's, U's, A's and T's left and nowhere on the board to play the cue, changing it and putting it back in the bag actually trapped my opponent with the cue rather than leaving me trapped with the cue. And that pretty much covers point 3 as well. How easy is it to play the cue on the board? Like I said, if it's really easy, you can maybe keep it because you know you're going to get rid of it later. If you're going to get stuck with it, consider playing it a lot sooner. Point number 4, are you sacrificing points by keeping or playing the cue? So sometimes when you keep the cue, you may sacrifice, say, a potential bonus next turn because you've decided that maybe you want to keep the cue because you're like fairly certain you're going to draw a U. Or maybe by playing the cue, you've missed a really great 30, 40 point scoring position for the other 6 letters on your rack. And remember, you're playing the game with 7 tiles on your rack. Just because you've got the cue on your rack doesn't mean you really have to focus on it too much. So like I showed you, if I focused on the cue, I would have played QI maybe straight away, and then maybe my opponent would have got like 30 points back on the triple letter squares, and I may not have had the eye to maximize the cue, and maybe it would have taken me another 2 or 3 turns to get a bonus. But in the case of not playing the cue, I scored 30 points, so I scored 10 more than I would have originally done, and I actually somehow managed to draw a bonus the next turn and then score 96. So you've always got to weigh up what can potentially happen and where the game can potentially go. So it's always really important to keep so much in mind, and sometimes it's too much to keep in mind, and that's okay, but always keep these kind of ideas in mind that maybe keeping the queue may not be as bad as you initially thought, but if you keep the queue for too long, you may be just sacrificing so much in terms of your rack that it just stops becoming worth it. So thank you for watching my video on when to keep the queue. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learnt something. And I will see you next time for more of Qwizical's guides. Bye!